Alright, so Richard Wolff again, my favorite Marxist on Twitter. This guy just never fails to surprise me, so he's said some crazy stuff right here, but he is right about one thing real quick. It is true that MLK did surround himself with many leftist socialist types, something that I don't think a lot of people know, and that's too bad. But there's still a lot to learn from someone like MLK, just like Noam Chomsky. Economically, there isn't much there, but he isn't someone you should ignore completely. He certainly has important things to say. But that's besides the point. Racism and capitalism is intermixed, so says Richard Wolff. Okay, now I know that Richard Wolff, being a Marxist, has a different view of capitalism than people who actually advocate for free market capitalism. He seems to think that the government has something to do with capitalism, despite the fact that that's the public sector, that's the part of our society where all wealth and resources are extracted from private ownership. That's the part of our economy that is collectivized and taken out of private hands, taken out of private control, taken away from you as a private citizen under the pretense that it's for the common good. So that's a bit odd for Richard Wolff and other Marxists to think this way, given that free market capitalism is all about private ownership, the antithesis to what the government does. But I digress. Capitalism is responsible for racism, though, really? Jim Crow laws, decrees by the state, separate but equal, legal segregation, state-mandated segregation, those came from our public sphere, not our private sphere. Now, with or without capitalism or socialism, racism is going to be a part of history and a part of a society. Because yes, humans can be tribalistic regardless of what systems you live under. But it was our public sphere, the government, which is that part of our society that takes away from private resources for the supposed good of all, for the common welfare that Richard Wolff so openly admires. It was them that imposed these laws, and I'm sure some racists were happy with them. But don't you think that these actions by government actually prevented racist nonsense from dissipating or perpetuated them? I would say it's fairly obvious. You force segregation, you disallow interracial marriage, that's another one, and you may sow divisiveness. And that's precisely what our government did, not our private sector. This all has nothing to do with capitalism. And furthermore, the Soviet Union famously had a long courtship, you could say, with socialism. They had and still do have horrible problems with racism and ethnic prejudice, and that's not to say a word about the homophobia that exists in Russia today that would make the Westboro Baptist Church say, hey, I think you're going a little too far. Or how about Venezuela? They've killed people for racial reasons every single year. They're certainly not capitalistic. Your boy Bernie Sanders praised them endlessly in years past, precisely for not being capitalistic and being more focused on the common folk, which is a complete joke. But they didn't cleanse themselves of racism after socialism took hold. Or how about Cuba, another place Sanders and Richard Wolff seem to love, and I'm assuming Richard Wolff has at least a soft spot for, I should say. They had racism dating back before Fidel Castro, that's true, but Fidel Castro, I'm told, tried to get rid of the racism in Cuba. He implemented his own wonderful socialistic ideas, which we've been told by the left led to a sky-high literacy rate and great medical care for all, which is utter nonsense. But Castro clearly had control. He had his way. He rid Cuba of any vestige of capitalism he could, and he was in power for almost 45 years, from the mid-60s until 2011. Cuba still has terrible racism in the country against black people, again, today. And also, it's worth pointing out, their racism is far worse than it is in the U.S. So what a crock of complete garbage for Richard Wolff to say that opposing capitalism is the way to oppose racism, and somehow with his worldview being played out, racism would be a thing of the past. Well, countries that align far more with Richard Wolff's ideology have been around for a long time, and they seem to be faring far worse than the U.S. in terms of racism. And that's even with the counterproductive and racist laws the U.S. used to have. But anyway, that's all for now. Like and subscribe, and take it easy.